All right, students. I'm going to be talking to you about expansion and war. It's kind of the overall theme, and one of the headings from the textbook. But I'm going to be talking with you particularly about Jefferson's second term in office as the president. So I'm going to get into that, and there's some issues that Jefferson has in relation to war during his second term in office, but there's a lot brewing which will ultimately lead to the War of 1812, which we'll cover in a later lecture. Okay, so let's get into the election of 1804. In the autumn of 1804, Jefferson is reelected in a landslide, winning all but 2 of 17 states. Now, events overseas and his stubbornness would bring many problems for Jefferson. And he had few successes during his second term in office. It's sort of plagued with issues and conflicts. Now, 2 conflicts that were taking shape during this time that would eventually result in war, we're going to talk about. One was the continuing tensions that were escalating in Europe due to the Napoleonic Wars. By 1803, this conflict had become full scale. The second issue stemmed from ceaseless white settlement that was taking place beyond the Mississippi River and the collision of white and Native American populations and cultures. In both the North and the South, tribes began to resist white encroachment and also to mobilize. This ultimately forged connections with British forces in Canada and Spanish forces in Florida between Native Americans. This is how this is how the 2 conflicts become intertwined with one another. The native conflict on land and the European conflict at sea will ultimately culminate and lead to the War of 1812, a very unpopular, ambiguous, and often forgotten war. So that is a reference to the war that is going on. We will get into the particulars of that again in a later lecture. So the United States is experiencing economic troubles during Jefferson's second term due to being at war with France. These issues would plague Jefferson's second term in office in the United States, would ultimately lead them down a path to another path to war with Great Britain. So American shipping in the Atlantic has exploded. The British maintained naval superiority in the Atlantic and all but destroyed the French fleet at the Battle of Trafalgar. Now, after Trafalgar, Napoleon announced the creation of what he called the Continental System. This was a continental blockade from European nations trading with Great Britain. Now, Napoleon makes this announcement in the form of the Berlin Decree, where France forbade European trade with Great Britain. France said it would capture United States ships that traded with Great Britain also. Now, Britain counters and issues the Orders in Council, which stated that all goods being traded with Europe must stop at Great Britain first. So this blockaded the European coast. Both of these violate the United States' rights to neutrality, and American ships are now caught between Napoleon's decrees and Britain's Orders in Council. American ships risked being captured by the British Navy if they tried to trade with Europe, and they would be risked being seized by the French if they attempted to dock at a British port. So there's double issue. Great Britain had been stopping United States ships on the high seas and seizing sailors off the decks and making them victims of impressment. We talked about this being an underlying cause in previous lectures of conflicts. Oftentimes, British sailors had to be forced or impressed into service in the Royal Navy due to the deplorable conditions aboard British ships. Also, low pay and floggings for minor infractions were other reasons people didn't want to become members of the Royal Navy. Now, by 1807, there were many British deserters, some that had joined American merchant marine companies and the American Navy. So Great Britain, knowing this, claimed the right to stop and search American merchant ships and re-impress deserters. This would become, again, the underlying cause of the War of 1812. An estimated 6,000 Americans were forced into the Royal Navy due to this policy of British impressment. One event in 1807, the Chesapeake Leopard Affair. The American naval frigate, the Chesapeake, encounters the British ship, the Leopard, in the summer of 1807, when the American vessel was returning from Norfolk with alleged deserters from the Royal Navy. The British never claimed the right to take native-born Americans. The American commander, James Barron, refused to allow the British to search the Chesapeake, and the Leopard then opened fire on the American vessel. 3 are killed, 18 wounded, 4 taken. Once news of this reaches the United States, Jefferson orders all British warships to be expelled from American waters, and the minister in England, James Monroe, was told to demand the British government to renounce their policy of impressment. Now, the British government disavowed the actions of the officer responsible for the Chesapeake Leopard incident and recalled him. They compensated those killed and wounded in the incident. They promised to return the 3 captured sailors. 1 had been hanged, and they refused to renounce the policy of impressment. Many Americans are angry and calling for war, and hysteria is ensuing. Congress enacted a measure known as the embargo, which will become one of the most controversial political issues of its time. Now, this prohibited American ships from leaving the United States for any foreign port anywhere in the world. The result of the Embargo Act of 1807 and the forbidding of trade with all foreign nations created a lot of economic issues in the United States and ultimately resulted in a serious depression for most of the nation. The merchant class of New England's hit particularly hard, most of them Federalists. And in New England, trading is life, but ship hulls are rotting in the harbor as soup lines are forming because of Mad Tom Jefferson. And this lasts for 3 years. Now, the election of 1808, this happens amidst the embargo-induced depression. James Madison, Jefferson's Secretary of State and ally, is still able to win the presidency. A few days before leaving office, Jefferson approved a bill ending his experiment with what he termed peaceable coercion. Congress then passes the Non-Intercourse Act just before Madison takes office, which reopens trade with all foreign nations except France and Great Britain. This is still does not fix the economy. The economy is still a disaster. Now, the Non-Intercourse Act passes 3 days before Jefferson leaves office. 1 year later, in 1810, Congress allowed the Non-Intercourse Act to expire and replaced it with Macon's Bill Number 2, which reopened free commercial relations with Britain and France under certain conditions. This bill promised to end an embargo against the country that would respect America's right to neutrality. Napoleon announced he would no longer interfere with American shipping, and Madison announced that the embargo against Great Britain would automatically go into effect early in 1811 unless Britain did the same. The British government repealed its blockage of Europe but the repeal came too late to prevent the War of 1812. Now, Jefferson returns to Monticello, refers to his time as the president as his splendid misery. In 1820, Jefferson founded the University of Virginia, designed all the original buildings for the campus, and you can refer to a previous lecture I put out on the Jefferson's Hemming controversy for some of his post-presidency life, and on down the road, not for right now, it's because it's not relevant to the scope of what we're doing for my U.S. History 1 class, but on down the road, I will do a bonus lecture on Jefferson's life post-presidency. But in the meantime, you can check out that lecture over the Jefferson's Hemming controversy, or you can watch the Ken Burns documentary, Thomas Jefferson, which part 2 goes into his time as president and beyond. Okay. Now that is it for today, everybody. Thank you for listening, and I will talk to you all very soon. Thanks.